past year, I've been trying to figure out the upgrade to my Pocket 6K, and I was dead set on the Canon C70 for the longest time, but I went with something else. I went with the Sony FX3. And in today's video, I wanted to walk you guys through my thought process and the reasons why I went with the Sony FX3. I've been talking about the C70 and the FX3 for so long, and I've gotten a bunch of questions on why I didn't go with the C70. So in today's video, I'm going to go through all the reasons why I bought this camera, and I'm going to kind of compare it from Canon and Sony and the reasons why I didn't go with the C70. So after shooting at the C70, I just really value having a minimal and compact setup. I don't like having to bring all these accessories to rig out a camera and have this big old behemoth of a rig for when I'm out shooting run and gun. I find myself shooting run and gun with weddings, field trips, stuff with Sam. I'm not really on a set or in like a proper studio, so I don't need a camera like that I can like take that time to set it up. I want to have something that has great battery life. Autofocus is a plus, IBIS is a plus. Honestly, just having a simple setup where all you need is a lens, internal battery, internal storage, a mic on top, and it's tiny. It's a pretty solid setup for me. I brought my Pocket 6K to Hawaii in this small little setup, and I've mentioned this before, but it was just really annoying to bring around, and just the camera body itself is just massive. And I loved this camera. I bought it back in 2019, and it carried me through so many different projects, and I feel like I was able to grow a lot because of this camera. It's a super solid camera for the price. I think I was getting to the point where all the things I was sacrificing with the Pocket 6K, I didn't want to sacrifice anymore. So yeah, I love the image on the Pocket 6K, but the ergonomics and the workflow didn't really fit my run and gun style. So I eventually sold it a few weeks ago. So yeah, I bought the Sony FX3 and I am super stoked on it. I've had the chance to shoot on it a couple times, shot a couple times with Sam, shot a wedding, and I've been doing some YouTube stuff. I am incredibly stoked on my purchase, and I couldn't imagine not getting this camera. I feel like Sony just gives you so much for your money. You get S-Log3, you get XLR, full frame, IBIS, autofocus, Cinetone, great battery life. You shoot to SD cards and CF Express cards. You get dual card slots. There's so many different reasons why this camera is so rad, and I've been having a blast shooting on it. I love that I can build it up, I can keep it minimal, and for the most part, I've been keeping it minimal. So Editor Thomas here, I forgot to mention this in the main video, but the FX3 also has dual native ISO, and I had that on the Pocket 6K. I think it was 400 and 3200, but this has 640 as the base and 12,800, and 12,800 is insanely clean. So I don't really use high ISOs. Since it has dual native ISO, there's really no reason not to use 12,800 when it's in low light. So yeah, quick little intermission there. See ya. And yeah, I am super stoked to have this camera for travel, for YouTube, and for client work. I have no doubts that this camera will perform shooting field trips, shooting with Sam, and shooting really anything I throw at it. And the only thing I think this camera is missing is internal ND, but I get it. They want to keep it small. They don't want to kill the FX6 or the FX9. It's not a big deal. Honestly, I don't really mind switching out filters. It's not the end of the world. So if you've been following along for a while, you know I've been a huge fan of the Canon C70, and I've been talking so much about it. I've shot with it since November when Sam bought it, and I was just getting this in my head of I want a C70 and I want an R5 or an R6. And I was dead set on the C70, but this FX3 pulled me away over to Sony. So I've been getting tons of questions on why I didn't go for the C70, why I went for the FX3, and also comparing the two. So let's get into that. So to answer the first question on why I didn't get the C70, it's kind of funny, but it's because of the FX3. Everything I mentioned before with its tiny size and everything you get with it, I felt like it was everything that the R5 should have been. The R5 is a hybrid camera. It's photo first and it's video second. And with the R5, it's really annoying to shoot video with. You don't get professional audio. All of the settings and buttons and everything was just kind of weird working with. Every time I shot on it, I was always missing exposure, and I know you can learn the camera, and I know it's still a great camera, but for someone like me, I want a cinema camera or something that's as close to a cinema camera as possible. And like I said a million times, I want a solid A camera, B camera setup, and honestly, I can't afford a C70 or an FX6 right now, so I would have had to go for an R5 or an FX3. And looking at the two and seeing how they would work on a professional level, the FX3 checks all the boxes and more. I feel like the FX3 bleeds really heavily into an A camera setup, whereas the R5 is kind of like a C camera setup. I don't think it's a perfect B camera, and it definitely doesn't bleed into an A camera setup. And seeing people like Danny Gevirtz, Niles Duran, Mike Dewey, people using the FX3 as their A camera, people who are leaving from the C200 and coming to this camera. It shows how solid this camera is. But it's still a stills camera that has overheating issues. It doesn't have XLR. It doesn't have C-Log 2. This camera gives you S-Log 3, which is the flattest curve. The R5 doesn't give you the flattest curve. So knowing that I'd have to go for a B camera first to be able to afford an A camera, the FX3 just made so much sense where even if I didn't get an FX6, I'd still be psyched on this. Whereas the R5, I feel like I wouldn't even get the R5. I'd just want the C70. But still, I want two cameras, one for travel, one for client work. So those are my preferences. And honestly, the FX3 and seeing that, I didn't even consider Sony for the longest time until they released this camera. And seeing just the FX3 and FX6 duo, I don't think the C70 and the R5 would get me stoked. And I don't think Canon is giving you everything that you're looking for the price tag. All right, so editor Thomas here again. And after I shot this video, I was asked why I didn't go for the A7S III and why I went for the FX3. And there's not really that much to it. The main reason why I went for this camera was honestly for the XLR ports. I think having the built-in handle with the XLR inputs is something that I really value, as well as having this camera being a part of the cinema line, and it has like a smaller kind of body. I said in a different video, I don't really like the Sony Alpha series kind of body style. The A7S III still has that kind of hybrid mirrorless camera body style to it, and it has an EVF. The EVF is kind of nice to have, but I think I value the XLRs more. I value having like the cageless design, though I have a cage on it. But this camera just feels video focused, whereas the A7S III, though it's an incredible video camera, it still has like a photo camera feel to it. So they're basically the same camera. They produce the same image. They're the same sensor. They're both incredible. You can't go wrong with either. I think the A7S III is definitely cheaper, but if you're a serious cinematographer or someone who's shooting weddings or wanting to get like their first camera for video, I would get one of these. And if you want something for photo, maybe you get like an A7 something, or you just get a Fuji X100V. So I thought I'd throw that in there. I feel like that'd be valuable. But I think that's pretty much it on why I bought the FX3 over the A7S III. So let's get back into the other A-roll. See ya. So for the sake of comparison, let's compare the C70 to the FX3. So first off, for the price tag, the C70 is about $5,000 and the FX3 is about $4,000. Add on some lenses. I think for the C70, I prefer the RF glass. For the FX3, I bought a Sigma lens. So it's $1,000 and then the RF glass is like $2,000. You could go for Sony GM glass, then it's kind of like the same price tag for that. But looking at the package as a whole, the FX3 is tiny. It's like half the size of the C70. The FX3 is more of a travel and gimbal camera, and the C70 is kind of like a hybrid cinema mirrorless camera. So the C70 is a lot bigger. It's kind of got a weird shape, but it's still small enough to bring around for traveling, but it's not tiny enough for like backpacking or really anything if you're shooting for fun. So knowing that the FX3 has all these rad things like full frame, for the C70 you need a speed booster to get full frame, but it's like fake full frame. The C70 has mini XLR, this has full XLR. They both use SD cards. They both have dual card slots. This camera actually takes CF Express cards, which is pretty rad. They both have great battery life, and they both don't really need to be rigged up. They both shoot in the flattest profile that they give you. The Sony actually gives you a Cinetone, which is based off of the Venice color profile. The only downside is that the XLRs are built into the handle on the FX3. I honestly don't mind that. I'm going to be rocking this handle the entire time. I feel like the C70 and the FX3 are super similar. The C70 definitely has the upper hand with internal ND. I think they're geared towards different styles of shooting and different people. But if you're like me and you're considering either camera and you're not married to either lens system, honestly, I think you should go for the FX3 if you can't afford the C70. The C70 is a great camera, but I now understand why people shoot full frame. I love how tiny this thing is, and it's just super fun to shoot on. The C70 is stunning. It has false color, which is really nice to use, but I feel like Canon was lacking in a lot of different departments with the C70. The build quality was not good at all. The flip out screen got super loose and broke within the first couple months. And you can't have that on a camera that you're spending $6,000 on. So yeah, if you're like me and you want a solid A camera, B camera setup and you can't afford a $10,000 FX6 or a $10,000 C70 setup, I think the FX3 is a solid move. But if you're someone that just wants one camera to do it all, I think the FX3 makes it really hard for people to want to buy the C70. If you're married to the Canon lens system, by all means, go for the C70. And if you're married to the Sony system, definitely get the FX3. It's a no-brainer for that. But if you're someone that doesn't mind switching systems, and if you're someone that values having a small setup that packs so much into it, the FX3 is a solid choice, I think. After shooting on the C70 for almost a year, and now shooting on this, I don't have any desire to go back to the C70. The C70 was great, got tons of great images out of it, but just the ease of use and the size and how much is actually packed into this camera, I can't ask for more. But knowing that I want to get an FX6 that compares well to the C70, the FX6 is like everything the C70 should have been. So knowing that, it made it easy for me to switch over to Sony, knowing just the direction that Sony is going to, knowing that that camera is somewhere in the future for me. Whereas with Canon, I kind of feel stuck with the R5 and the C70. So yeah, I am now on Team Sony, and I think it's good to be open-minded. I wasn't open-minded towards Sony beforehand. I was Team Canon for the longest time, but I think Sony has definitely stepped it up. Their colors are great, and I think they give you everything you need inside of this camera. So yeah, I want to talk about Canon versus Sony and kind of the things I've seen with both companies. So I want to talk about some things I noticed with Canon and Sony on the search for my next camera. So when looking for your next camera, I think you need to step back and really look at what are your needs, what are your wants, and see if you're married to any lens system. Like I said, I had basically no Canon lenses, so it made it easy for me to consider jumping into different systems. I've said this so many times, I value having a travel setup. If you don't value having a travel setup and you want like a proper cinema camera, you'll probably end up with a C70 or something. But seeing everything that Sony offers, from the FX9 to the FX6 to the FX3, seeing that combo really brought me in, honestly. The FX3 was super easy to get into. It's like $6,000 for everything. Whereas the R5, I don't think it's a viable option for professionals for video. The C70, it's a pretty solid option too, but seeing what Canon was giving you there and seeing what Sony was giving you, I felt like I'd be sacrificing so much if I went with Canon versus Sony. Another thing that I've noticed is that Sony actually listens to their audience. I feel like Canon is kind of just doing their own thing, just willy-nilly. People are going to buy their cameras. But Sony actually takes the time, from what I can see, to listen and to give people what they want in their next cameras. I feel like having a camera company that is doing that, that's innovative, giving you new updates, giving you things that they know that their audience wants, I feel like that's a pretty good place to be in for owning camera gear. And another thing too is that Sony is actually working with creatives. Canon is probably working with higher up creatives that are kind of up there in their own sphere. I don't see them working too much with the smaller guys, but all over YouTube, I see Sony is working with all these smaller guys, all the mid-tier guys, upper tier guys. But being a cinematographer, having the opportunity to work alongside Sony is super rad. I think being able to test their gear, shoot little pieces for them, really have any kind of opportunity like that is something I think is super valuable, where with Canon, I don't really think that's there. If it is, I haven't seen much of it. With Sony, it's definitely there, and it's really exciting. Another thing you should look at is the current state of the camera versus future promises. And this is a pretty bad section for Canon. There are rumors of the C50, the C90, the R5C, the R5C being the FX3 killer, the Canon R5 and R6 not coming out with C-Log 3 and only with C-Log. That is probably the worst decision they've made. The FX3 is the same price as the R5 and R6, and it has all of the log profiles. I think having the professional, flattest log profile in your base camera like this is a solid choice by Sony. Eventually, Canon gave a firmware update to get C-Log 3 on the R5, and C-Log 3 is supposed to be coming to the R6, and I think C-Log 2 is supposed to be coming to the R5. But it's taken so long that I feel like when I buy a camera, I want everything that it is to be perfect. It's kind of the same thing with the Komodo. The Komodo came out in beta and it was crashing on so many different people and it wasn't ready for production. And they were promising that it'll be ready in the future, but I don't want to buy a camera that doesn't have what I want and hope that it gets included down the line, especially with different cameras. The FX3, if it was rumored, would be something that I would probably consider waiting for. But for me, I didn't want to wait for something that could have been that may not actually be true. And having rumors of the C50 and the C90 and the R5C was pretty enticing, honestly. The C90 could have been a nicer C70 with maybe full frame, or a nicer body or a better flip out screen or whatever. And the R5C could have been a solid video focused B camera, but we haven't seen much of it come out. Sony's already kind of off in their own league, bringing out all these cameras, but Canon not bringing them out yet and kind of like teasing them. I don't want to have to wait like a year to get that kind of camera. I want to get something that I know is out and it's currently production ready, and I can actually start using it and making money with it. So that's my opinion on rumors and waiting for things. If the FX3 didn't come with S-Log3 and they promised to update it, honestly, I don't think I would have bought this camera. I think S-Log2 and C-Log3 are fine, but having the flattest profile in a body like this is just perfect for someone like me. And yeah, I think the FX6 and the FX3 is the perfect setup for me. I think with the Canon setup, it'd have to be like the C90 or the C70 in the R5C, but the C90 and the R5C don't exist. So that made my choice pretty clear for me to buy the FX3. So yeah, I bought this camera to use on a whole different array of things. I bought it for travel and YouTube, and I also bought it for client work. This will be my A camera for the foreseeable future, and I am not bummed on that at all. I'm really excited to use this for personal work and for client work because I know it's going to get the job done. With this camera being small and lightweight and just super minimal, I don't have a problem bringing this out to quick travel trips. And with how much power it packs in with this, I have no problems using this for client work. But knowing that this camera can fit so many different styles of shooting, it's really exciting to use. So I want to talk about the kit that I built out for this, and it's pretty minimal actually. So I bought the Tilta cage because of the side handle. I feel like it gives it like a nice weight. I bought two 256GB pro grade SD cards, V90. I bought a little spacer. It's actually right here. A little spacer for the mic holder. You definitely need these. And I bought the Sennheiser MKE600. I bought a little SD card case, a little small rig arm for the quarter 20s on top. I can mount a light. I can mount a monitor. You can mount so many different things on there. And then I bought 2 extra batteries because it comes with one. So I have 3 batteries, 2 chargers, and I think that's about it. Oh, and also bought a Tiffin Black Pro Mist. So I'm trying out different filters. I'm really loving the Black Pro Mist. I bought the Sigma 24-70. I rented the Sony GM 24-70, and I'm actually really stoked that I went with the Sigma. I feel like it's cleaner. I feel like the manual focus wheel is a lot nicer. The autofocus is great on this, and the build quality is just like sturdier, and it's half the price. So I feel like the Sigma is like 90% of the Sony GM, and I don't think it's worth that extra like $1,200 to get the Sony GM. Pretty stoked on the Sigma 24-70. I love this focal range, and having 24-70 just makes run and gun so much nicer. So you can find all those in the description below, but for the most part, it's a pretty simple setup. I still really want a cinema camera. This FX3 is a solid travel and B camera setup, but having a proper cinema camera with SDI and exposure tools and that ergonomic body, I still really want that for client work, but I'm in no rush anytime soon to pick one up. We'll see how work goes, but I'll be using this FX3 for everything, and I have no doubt that it's going to get the job done. I'm sure some of you are surprised, but the FX3 really blew up my plans for having a C70, and I still think the C70 is great, but the FX3 I feel like just gives you so much more for it. But knowing the Sony path versus the Canon path, and I think the Sony path is the right one for me, and I think I made a solid choice, and I'm super stoked on it. I left Sony years ago because of their color science, but Sony actually brought me back, and I think their colors are fantastic, and I'm really stoked that they made this camera. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Leave a like if you did. And yeah, leave a comment down below if you're considering either of these cameras or if you've switched systems. I'd love to see where you guys are at. And I want to see if you guys have the same feelings and thoughts on the FX3 versus the C70. So yeah, subscribe if you like these types of videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy. Peace.